Tutu Alicante, Executive Director of EG Justice, one of the leading voices on all things human rights and Equatorial Guinea. Thanks for joining us today. I first got to know you years ago when you and I were talking about the wonderful son of Equatorial Guinea's long-standing dictator and his predilection for nice cars and all kinds of beautiful homes, and especially his obsession with Michael Jackson. I don't know if we'll talk about Michael Jackson today. We'll see where the conversation takes us, but thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure, Casey. Thank you for inviting me.
You and I have had about 1,000 conversations in our past about all things kleptocracy, money laundering, international corruption, dirty money flows, and of course how that helps regimes like those still overseeing Equatorial Guinea. But I wanted to talk about something a little bit different with you today, and that is the wonderful world of football or soccer for American audiences, which is of course a world that has no links, no allegations, and no concerns about corruption whatsoever. Is that correct?
I wish that was the case, Casey, but I think it's almost impossible to extricate corruption out of soccer these days, particularly global soccer. And then when you come at the regional and then the national level, in some cases, as the case in Equatorial Guinea shows, it's even worse. You know, the level of corruption that has now pervaded soccer.
Well, before we get into some of the details about Equatorial Guinea, give us the broad overview. Why is it? Of all the sports, there's plenty of sports, and of course some have other allegations of corruption concerns surrounding them, but it really seems to always come back to football or soccer. Why is that? Why is it that soccer, this one industry, this one sport, is the one that seems to always be finding a home and a welcoming embrace for all kinds of corrupt networks?
Yeah. Well, I have to, before I answer your question, I have to say, look, I love soccer, right? I've been playing soccer since I could walk, basically, right? And even at this point with my knees, sounding more like a rusted metal than joints, I still play soccer as much as in fact, I coach my kids. I have a son that's 14 years old, and I coach his team, right? So Tuesdays, Thursdays, we are there coaching, and on weekends, we are there playing. So this is a sport that, for me represents joy, right? But the team that I coach, is called Ubuntu, and I chose that name on purpose, right? Ubuntu, as you know, is an African philosophy, which means I am because we are. My humanity and your humanity are deeply interconnected, all right? And that is what I try to instill in the kids that I coach, right? More so than soccer and the beautiful game and the dribbles and all that, is how to be good human beings, right? And soccer gives you that opportunity, to instill great values in human beings. It gives you an opportunity to bring people together, unity, build unity, etc. And governments understand that. And governments understand that people love soccer. People are passionate about soccer. If you ever watch a soccer match in a stadium, you see how people are basically going crazy, right? So governments understand that. And they are using that emotional connection that people have to soccer to then do all sort of nefarious things that, hopefully we'll get to talk about here, right? But it is undeniable that soccer is the most popular sport in the world, right? Millions and millions of people play soccer all over the world.
Let's talk about Equatorial Guinea. Can you give us a brief overview about how the regime has used football, has used soccer to shape this image of itself, both domestically but also internationally?
So I think one thing that your audience has to understand, when we're talking about the EG regime, is that we are not talking about a normal government here, right? Equatorial Guinea has the distinction of having the longest serving head of state in the world.
That's nice. You call him a head of state. We can call him a dictator.
A dictator, exactly, right? So, and that's not by happenstance. That's not a coincidence, right? These are people, these are men and a family, they have deeply entrenched themselves in the government and stay ensconced in that power and do use everything at their disposal, to basically stay there. What you have in Equatorial Guinea is a completely capture state, where there are not institutions for democratic reform or democratic change whatsoever, right? So instead of a government, what you have is a crime syndicate, right? A mafia. So in that context, anything, including soccer, becomes a tool that mafia uses to stay in power and to keep people quiet on the corners. So why soccer? Well, they understand that people love soccer, right? As I told you, I grew up playing soccer. Every single person in Equatorial Guinea, they have the abilities to play, physical abilities to play, play soccer at one point or another, right? And the government know that, and they have used that precisely, to keep themselves in power and keep vulnerable people and other people at the margins.
So there's a couple details I wanted to just bring up in this conversation, which, again, to bring things down to a kind of granular level. There was this incident last year at AFCON, where the national team, can you tell us what the national team is called?
That's the Nzalang Nacional.
Nzalang Nacional. Thank you for helping me with my pronunciation on that. I apologize for the other things I will attempt to pronounce later. This was something that generated even global headlines beyond EG. The captain, Emilio Nsue, was awarded the Golden Boot as the tournament's top scorer.
Correct.
And again, this is one of these great moments, not only in the history of EG soccer, but of course, even broader regional history. This was quite the achievement for the team, for the country itself. And yet, this wasn't the only thing that was happening at the time. There was this corruption scandal that was already unfolding, and there's this moment where Nsue steps up to the stage to receive his award. And tell us what happened.
So there are many things happening with the national team in Equatorial Guinea, all of which tend to revolve around corruption, right? Emilio Nsue and his friends were complaining about the situation in which millions of dollars they were supposed to be going either from FIFA, from the state itself, from the government, from Equatorial Guinea itself, towards developing soccer, were ending up in bank accounts owned by the director of FEGIFOOT, which is the national association that deals with soccer, or the Ministry of Sports, or the people in the inner circles, typically in the inner circles of the vice president or the president, right? So you have, first of all, I don't know if your audience knows this. When you're looking at Emilio Nsue, you're looking at a player that was born in Mallorca, Spain. And you go down the roster of players in the Equatoguinean team, and they are players born somewhere in Spain, somewhere in France, somewhere in Portugal, somewhere else other than Equatorial Guinea, right? And that's because there isn't a football league, functioning football league inside the country. Now, you're bringing these young players, they've grown up, and many of them, including Emilio Nsue, actually play for the youth level of the national team in Spain, right? So these are kids, they're used to a level of, hotels and physical trainers and all these different amenities that you need to play soccer. And because they have some connection with Equatorial Guinea, they say, okay, I'm going to play for my country or my grandparents' country or wherever, thinking this is the way I show my love for this country. And they get there, and there isn't a physical trainer, no one to help them with massages or anything. They get to the hotel. Often the hotels are not booked. Often they themselves have to put off their own money to pay for their hotel. Buses to travel to, all these different infrastructure that you need that is not there because of corruption, right? When someone like Emilio Nsue steps up and speaks out about corruption, it takes a lot of courage, right? Because they know the country they're dealing with. It takes a lot of courage, And I have, in discussing this, I have told people, look, think about Megan Rapinoe in the U.S. or think about, LeBron James or Colin Kaepernick complaining about injustices happening in the sport. Think about the animosity or the backlash that they have to withstand in a place like the U.S. where there is freedom of expression, where you have a government that is not interfering in sports, etc. Now, go to Equatorial Guinea, a captured state, a closed state, a state without basic fundamental rights, and imagine someone like that making a statement about incompetency, about corruption, right? It takes more than courage, right? In my opinion, these are people that are bending the arc of history towards justice, right? And these are people that we have to celebrate.
I'm sure you were watching this in real time. What was your reaction in watching some of this?
Well, actually, an anecdote, so after he said that, he was kicked out of the team, right? Theodorin, then the vice president.
And the son of the long-standing dictator. Yeah.
We say we're not going to discuss him, but it's inevitable. He's basically meshed in everything that happens in Equatorial Guinea these days. But then Theodorin steps in a couple of weeks later and said, "No, we cannot kick him out. We have to invite him." So think about the optics here, right? Theodorin is positioning himself as behind the scene, the person that rules over this government that kicks somebody off the team because they have denounced corruption.
Yeah.
A couple of days later, because he understands the psychology of Equatoguineans and how they love soccer, said, "No, you love this captain. I am bringing him back onto the team.
I can be the one to do this.
Exactly.
I should also deserve your respect because of this." Yeah.
Exactly. No, but what's going on through my head, as all this is happening, is one, figuring out, how do we get more people in the position of Emilio Nsue to see the possibilities of stepping up and challenging something that is going to fix the country, perhaps not for them, right? Emilio Nsue right now, I think he's 37 or 38. Yeah. But other people, they're going to come behind him. You need trailblazers. You need people that are going to go out there and change the landscape so that, people that come behind them find a team that has the resources and has the philosophy that allows kids to play for the team.
It's funny. You see this tension kind of emerging in the world of sports, and in this case, the world of soccer, where on the one hand, it's providing all of these lucrative opportunities to embezzle funds, to launder money, and of course, beyond that, to launder the image of the regime in question. But on the other hand, these players, in this case, especially the captain, these are larger-than-life figures. These are heroes for not only Equatoguineans, but especially for the younger generations that are coming up. Of course, those who have only known this regime their entire lives. And you see this tension in play, and it really broke last year. I should ask, what is Nsue? Is he still on the team? Is he still speaking out in any capacity? Has there been any update to the story?
No, he's still on the team. But what you've seen, is that many of the people that coalesced around Emilio Nsue when he complained about this situation are definitely sticking to their guns, right? Because they realize that some things have to change. Knowing that someone like Theodorin wants to be seen as a person fixing everything, so they are going to him and saying, look, we need to be able to go to hotels and buses and have all these facilities that allow us to play soccer and not break our knees and not, get injured. Otherwise, we're going to all end up like Tutu Alicante over there without knees.
Yeah, well, look, I'm right there with you. My knees are a lot noisier than they once were. But look, again, the fact that something like this could happen to the national team, could happen to one of these great players that Equatorial Guinea has not only produced but should be celebrating, and of course, this is happening all across Equatorial Guinea in terms of officials embezzling funds, looting those resources, making sure the infrastructure budget, the health budget, the education budget does not get filled. Hospitals aren't built, roads aren't built, maternity mortality rates are through the roof, potable, drinkable water access is still not nearly where it should be, despite having one of, if not the highest GDPs in all of Africa. Do we have any other updates in the last few years about how the regime has been looting the country's wealth, has been embezzling funds, and is using that money to help strengthen the regime? Has it changed at all, or is it still the kind of model that it always was, using things like oil wealth or timber extraction, especially to enrich the ruling regime at the expense of everyone else? Has anything changed in the last few years?
Unfortunately, all I have is bad news, my brother.
That's okay.
The day after Maduro was arrested
out of Venezuela,
Obiang decides, we have to now move the capital from Malabo to Oyala, La Ciudad de La Paz.
President Obiang announced that they have to move the capital. Okay.
Exactly. That has now allowed many of these ministers to set up hotels, set up all these different schemes in which, because they know everybody, civil servants are going to, or embassies are going to now be required to move to this capital in the forest, in the middle of nowhere, without any infrastructure, to set up a new city only because Obiang has decided that he needs to be as hidden as he can get to from the reaches of, I don't know, what Western countries he's afraid of, right?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that the United States is going to be extricating Mr. Obiang anytime soon, given the partnership that's developed.
Yeah, it tells you how these dictators think, right? They always scared that, something might happen to them too. Yeah. So so things haven't gotten better, right? We're running out of oil. Oil, as you know, is a finite resource. Right now, Equatorial Guinea no longer figure. It used to be the third largest oil producing nation after Nigeria and Angola. Right now, we're not even close, right? So the economy, we've borrowed so much money from China, we've borrowed from the IMF, so the economy is horrible right now, but yet these government officials continue to find ways to scheme the system and enrich themselves.
And of course, one way this has all manifested itself is with the Pope's visit, and the Pope himself being a sports fan, although in this case, here in the United States, he's a fan of baseball. But I wanted to bring things back to sports for a moment, especially the world of soccer, because look, you and I are talking here in 2026. The World Cup was one of the biggest things internationally of this year, as it usually is, and of course, FIFA itself, the governing body, associated with all manner of corruption scandals and dirty money influencing networks. This is maybe a little bit too optimistic of a question, but has FIFA come out with any position or impact on some of these corrupt networks in EG, especially related to the world of EG soccer? Is there a reason to think we can look to FIFA as the potential savior on this?
I'm just praying that FIFA doesn't give Obiang the award they recently gave to the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Yes, the leader of peace, I believe, or something like that. Yes.
Yes, FIFA has, in fact, at least there are a couple of former FEGIFOOT. FEGIFOOT is the National Association of Soccer. There are a couple of directors of FEGIFOOT, they were sanctioned by FIFA, right, because of embezzlement of funds. And in the case of another guy, the second guy, I think it was because of bribes. So yes, FIFA has taken some steps, but as you just pointed out, FIFA is one of the most corrupt organizations. How did Qatar get the World Cup? How did Russia Putin in the midst of torturing people and poisoning people, and how did he get a World Cup? It goes all back to corruption, right? Yeah. So, we can expect FIFA to solve the corruption problems anywhere. It's certainly not in Equatorial Guinea.
You and I were just talking a moment ago about declining oil reserves and the pressure that might put on the regime's budget in Equatorial Guinea. There was a long article as well the other day talking about the role that declining oil reserves and potential transitions to a greener economy and renewable resources is also having in places like Saudi Arabia, which is also on the horizon for being the host of, I believe it's the 2034 World Cup, or is it 2030?
2030, I believe.
Okay, it's coming up in a few years, and all of a sudden there are these very real concerns about whether the infrastructure will be there in time, and of course whether the actual stadiums will be built in time. This is the risk that is run when investing in these kleptocratic nations, when awarding them these high-profile events. But one of the things that you have mentioned in the past is in these conversations about kleptocracy and international money laundering and the relationship with the regime is maybe sometimes we focus a little bit too much on the actual regime in question.
Indeed.
And not necessarily enough on some of the victims in places like Equatorial Guinea, of course, and plenty of other places around the world. So maybe instead of asking about some of the latest, most ridiculous investments that the ruling family has made, whether in private jets or celebrity memorabilia, what does this mean for the people on the ground in Equatorial Guinea? Are there any specific stories you'd like to share? What is it that you think listeners should come away with in terms of those who are on the ground as victims of all of this kleptocracy in Equatorial Guinea?
All right. I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you a couple of stories in terms of victims, all right? One is about a young woman called Chiquitina. Chiquitina was 23 years old, pregnant with what was about to be her third child, right? 2 months into her pregnancy, she started bleeding profusely. She calls her father, who then drives her to the hospital. They arrive at the hospital, and the nurse says, "I'm sorry, but the doctor, who is a civil servant who is supposed to be there, has not shown up all day. Instead, he is at his private clinic." The father calls the doctor, say, "My daughter cannot survive the trip to your clinic. Would you please come? She's bleeding." The doctor couldn't make it in time. And there you have a young woman, 23 years old, bled to death. There was no resources in that hospital. There was no electricity, no doctor. All she had was her father's hand. all right? Chiquitina was my sister, all right? Her father, obviously, was my father. 16 years later, in 2014, my father went to that same exact hospital, renal insufficiency, right? And again, there was no oxygen, there was no dialysis machine, and my father died an unnecessary death at that same hospital, right? And this is the part that, is difficult for people to comprehend about kleptocracy, right? I'm going to show you a couple of things here. You know what this is, right, Casey? This is a latex glove, right, which you can find basically at any hospital you go to here in the U.S., any doctor's office, any clinic, you can find several of these. In fact, I got this on Amazon for cleaning around the house. You buy a box. By the time you check the mathematics on it, it's like 3 cents for this thing over here. You cannot find this at hospitals in Equatorial Guinea. This is a country that at one point had the highest GDP per capita, not just in Africa, but in the whole world, because of the amount of oil they were producing in Equatorial Guinea, right? This is a sign of opulence, right? This is a replica of Michael Jackson's glove. Theodorine has 3 of these. For one of these, he paid $350,000. Imagine how many of these gloves you can buy with this, right? So this is what Equatorial Guinea is like, right? And it's not a metaphor. It is a reality, in which someone like my sister or someone like my father or someone like every single Equatoguinean that you talk to has similar stories, right? Of a system, a highly kleptocratic system that failed their loved ones, right? In a place where Theodorine has 3 yachts, Theodorine has the largest collection of Michael Jackson memorabilia, etc., And this is what kleptocracy really is in the country I come from, right? This is what it represents. Most people are not going to understand, sanctions and all this fancy stuff that you and I have, the oil enablers, any of that stuff, but they understand these realities that we live with every single day in my country.
Tutu, thank you for sharing that story with us, because it does highlight that these are real people's lives, and these are real victims, and their stories are just as valuable, if not more, than anything else you and I are talking about today, and are millions of times more valuable than any Michael Jackson glove will ever be. Sorry. You mentioned enablers a moment ago. I remember as an undergraduate 1,000 years ago at beautiful Rice University in lovely Houston, Texas, your president, President Obiang, came and visited. Now, look, I was an idiot 22-year-old. I'm only a little bit less of an idiot now, but I do remember him coming, and I remember researching for one of the projects I was working on how they described his visit. And there was a brochure that my school, my university, put out. Obiang had already been in power for 30 years at that point. And the brochure described him, celebrated him as this visionary reformer who was doing everything he can to improve Equatorial Guinea's infrastructure, health infrastructure, building hospitals, and as someone who we should elevate. And again, I'm very proud to have gone to Rice. I had a wonderful time there. But it's these moments, these things that happen where institutes, individuals in democratic countries use these free legal provisions and their own skills to elevate these figures. That, again, was me a little bit on the soapbox there. Talk to me about the role of corrupt networks in identifying football as a potential way to transform that image both domestically as well as internationally. There's this case that happened with Spain where they hired a former Real Madrid player named Manuel Sanchez to train the national team and to rebuild relations with Spain. Of course, Equatorial Guinea, a former Spanish colony. How does that fit within what we've just been talking about of image management, image, laundering, transforming the reputation of this regime?
So there is a case of Manuel Sanchez going and training, supposedly training Equatoguineans. And there is even a worse example out there of the Spanish national team, fresh out of winning the World Cup in South Africa, being invited to go to Equatorial Guinea to go play a friendly match, right? Clearly, so on the one side you have a government that has realized, okay, people love soccer. Mm-hmm. People love La Roja, which is the nickname for the Spanish national team. And if we can bring La Roja here, we will score some points, right? You know, it helps legitimize our government, right? The unfortunate thing, you know, is that you have teams like the Spanish team and many other national federations and national teams that have realized, oh, we can definitely make a lot of money by whitewashing the images of many of these kleptocrats, right? And that's unfortunately what Spain was doing by showing up and playing in Equatorial Guinea, knowing very well the realities, right?
Well, there was another incident, this was now 10 years ago, back in 2016, where there was the Atletico de Madrid president, Enrique Cerezo, who visited President Obiang, and according to my notes here, not only publicly congratulated him, but presented him with an Atletico de Madrid jersey bearing Obiang's name. And he also, attended the private wedding of Ruslan Obiang, the President Obiang's son as well. I didn't get an invitation to that wedding. Did you? Were you able to make it?
One thing you have to keep in mind, you know, Casey, you know, is that many of these visits, many of these interactions are not happening for free. Right, Barcelona is not wearing visit RDC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Arsenal is not wearing visit Rwanda for free. I mean, typically this government have to pay a lot of money. So it's the same thing with. So Ruslan Obiang, you know, has invested a lot of money into Atletico, right? You know, Atletico Madrid. But you know, when you look at Man City and many of Newcastle in the UK, you know, you see how much money they're taking from the Saudis or from the Qataris and. So there is a lot of corruption in soccer that, you know, perhaps for the average soccer watcher, soccer audience out there goes unnoticed, but it bears examining, it bears digging deeper and exposing, right? You know, because take DRC, for instance, or Rwanda, you know, you're looking at governments they are basically killing their people, imprisoning journalists, and doing all this, committing all these atrocities, and we forget about it, you know, because you see, you know, Saka or some fancy player in the UK, you know, wearing a shirt that says, you know, visit Rwanda, visit RDC, in the case of Barcelona, right? You know, so we need to do better at exposing, you know, those links between these highly kleptocratic and authoritarian governments using soccer to whitewash their image. It's important to do that work.
And again, unfortunately, in this case, it's not just the world of soccer itself. Take Rwanda, for instance. Rwanda has been one of the key partners for the National Basketball Association, the NBA, here in the United States and Canada over the last few years with, I remember the team president out of the Toronto Raptors organization going on and on about how wonderful President Paul Kagame is, despite, of course, his being in power for decades at this point and overseeing an ongoing invasion of DRC with all kinds of horrific knock-on effects for the actual victims of this. Meanwhile, the NBA is out here telling us what a wonderful president Mr. Kagame is and how he should be supported, so on and so forth. And, of course, in addition to other relations with the United Arab Emirates, China, the list goes on and on for the NBA. Talk to us, though, about maybe something a little bit more optimistic moving forward. Accountability. You talked about digging into some of these networks, exposing them. Is that all that it takes? Simply highlighting these networks, highlighting some of these investments? Is there more that should be done, can be done? What next step is there?
Yeah. I think it has to start with people they know, people on the inside, people like Emilio Nsue and other players coming out and denouncing the corruption, the incompetency, everything around soccer that is taking soccer away from something, a tool that should be out there to uplift the dignity of the people watching it, to being used as a tool to stay entrenched in power or to enrich one family. So it has to come from people there inside that know what's happening, right? When I say something about soccer and corruption, nobody in Equatorial Guinea takes me seriously, because they say, oh, this is someone that's against the government, what can you expect? But when Emilio Nsue or any other player of that stature says it, it has power, right? And it has to also come from people that understand how the regional and national mechanism in FIFA work, right? And there, that's where journalists can make a difference, right? When you have an expose from the New York Times or someone, Washington Post, etc., looking at corruption at FIFA or CONCACAF, etc., it has some reverberating effect because, this is, in the New York Times is not easy justice, right? They speak with an authority that we don't have. So it has to come from there. But for the average citizen, it's important for us to start building, I don't know, the muscles. We need some new muscles over here that tells, okay, soccer is the sport that I love. However, when there are thousands of immigrants dying in Qatar to build stadiums, I'm going to question, whether I watch it, whether I don't. When soccer is coming to the U.S. and I have ICE officials out there detaining immigrants, and I have an administration that's saying, if you're from Nigeria, if you're from Cameroon, if you're from Ivory Coast, we're not going to give you a visa, then as someone that lives in Chapel Hill, do I spend thousands of dollars to book a hotel in Philadelphia or in New York to go watch a game, right? So we have to begin, and again, this is a sport that we love, that we are emotionally attached to in ways that are difficult to separate, but there has to be some sacrifices. If we want this universe that is completely taken by corruption to be broken down, we have to take some responsibility ourselves.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you reconcile all this with also being a soccer fan and, of course, a soccer coach as well? But you just answered that question. None of this is easy. None of this sounds easy. It's something you wrestle with. It sounds like every day, or at least every time you're trying to either teach the sport or watch some of this. For you personally, as you have seen, whether it's the revelations about the World Cup in Russia, the migrant deaths in Qatar, of course, what's going to be happening in Saudi Arabia, to say nothing of the relationships that many of these teams have with the Rwandas, the DRCs, and, of course, the Equatorial Guineas of the world. Have you shifted your own perspective over the last few years? Have you noticed yourself being more interested or more concerned in any specific direction about sports and corruption, or soccer and corruption?
As a person that loves soccer, as someone that loves coaching, as someone that loves everything that has to do with sport, I personally, have decided, this is a sport that I can use to teach values, right? And when soccer is coming to the U.S. or anywhere close to me, often I'll still go and watch it, but I have to ask myself, who is playing? When I'm supporting a team, when there are two teams playing, I have to look, okay, who is behind these teams, right? And the teams they have just chosen not to support because I disagree with their philosophy. If you're wearing visit DRC, visit Rwanda, or any of that, you basically telling me that, Kagame or the current Tshisekedi or whoever is in DRC right now, or Biang is a good person, that is not a team that I can support, right? So we have to make, I make those sacrifices, right? And as I was telling you at the beginning, I use soccer, to then teach codes about values that I strongly believe in.
For myself personally, I'm a big basketball fan, big NBA fan, and now you have to watch every single game with the referees that have a patch right here, right on their chest that says Emirates. They're all brought to you by the United Arab Emirates, of course, accused of any number of horrific crimes, not least inflaming genocide in Sudan. And yet every single game has that representation right there for them. Maybe as we turn toward a conclusion to the conversation, Tutu, where do you find the optimism in all this? Where do you find, is it the younger generations, the kids that you're working with? Is it the knowledge that if this all ends up blowing up into scandal, as it does seem to be doing year after year, there are openings for reform? Is it simply confidence in the fact that at some point this regime, even in EG, will fall and there will be openings and opportunities for democracy to flourish, as it certainly should in places like EG? Where do you find that optimism?
Today, as opposed to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we have, even in a place like Equatorial Guinea, where the internet penetrability is still very low, you have thousands of young people with a handheld device that can still watch TikTok and Instagram and all sort of social media videos and things, right? I think giving them the right tools, the right information for them to start developing those thinking and analytical muscles that helps them see, okay, what is behind someone like Theodorin? Why do we need to continue with someone that is more interested in this than this? It begins to build that muscle as a society collectively to where perhaps 5-10 years from now, perhaps when my kids are out of college, we might have a different Equatorial Guinea, right? But it has to come from us giving the right tools, giving the right... I often say, right, soccer is beautiful, right? And it's a powerful tool, but as with any powerful tool, who is using it and for what purposes, right? And we have to figure out how do we use this soccer-related material that we're putting out here to get the right message out there to young people.
Well, and again, one of the beauties of working on a report like this, having a conversation like this, speaking about a topic like this, is that, so many people are sports fans, so many people are soccer fans, and if that is the entry needed for information, for education about corruption, about authoritarianism, about kleptocracy, then all the better for it. Tutu Alicante, as a final question for you, just how confident are you that you will see EG win a World Cup in your lifetime?
Never say never, but so first of all, you should know that EG has never, ever been at a World Cup.
So maybe we start with qualifying first before we start talking about
first.
Championships.
I'm an old man right now. I'm 53 years old. I don't know how much longer I'm going to live. I think we have to start by winning an African Cup of Nations.
That's right.
Right? And with powerhouses out there like Senegal, Ivory Coast, Algeria, I don't know. I am an eternal optimist, and so I'm going to keep dreaming. But there's certain dreams that perhaps are not meant to happening. Like me making it to the moon. I don't know. I'm not an astronaut, and I don't like math.
Given that Artemis just returned to Earth, never say never.
Never say never.
And I look forward to seeing you there. No corruption on the moon. Last time I heard.
I hope so.
Yeah, Tutu Alicante, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Casey.